Welcome, everyone. It's so great to have you here today. I'm Lori Burris, the Education Innovation Advisor for LinkedIn, which is the leading provider of online learning videos. And we're here today with Karin Reed with Suddenly Virtual, Suddenly Hybrid. Before we start, just a few housekeeping rules, just to want to set up sort of the rules of engagement here. We're all about the skills, we're about organizational resilience, learning as a catalyst. But I also want you to know, we do want you to feel that you can ask lots of questions. You can use the chat. We have Anna Morocco from LinkedIn watching the chat. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A. Now, if you don't know where the Q&A is, it's at the bottom of your screen typically, and you can put those questions in there. And we've made it so that you can upvote those questions. So if you see a question that you were going to write or maybe ask yourself and you want it to be asked, just keep voting for it, because then that'll go to the top. We usually have a chance for about 5 questions at the end of the session. So then I'd like to tell you a little bit about Karin before we get going today. Karin is an Emmy Award-winning journalist, my first Emmy Award anything on this series. She's the CEO of Speaker Dynamics, a corporate communications training firm. It's been featured in Forbes. And while speaking through a webcam might be relatively new to much of the world, Karin has been teaching business professionals how to be effective on-camera communicators for nearly a decade. She's a 3-time author. She's been quoted as a thought leader by various publications, and she's been working with universities all along. She's worked with Stanford and Duke, and I actually met her through a Duke affiliate. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, Karin, is that you've made a journey from journalism to your current endeavors as a Speaker Dynamics. Tell us how that journey occurred.
Right, because it doesn't seem like it's connected, right? But it actually has a very logical process that I followed. So, I began as a broadcast journalist, as you mentioned, working primarily for NBC, and won an Emmy along the way, interviewed luminaries like Muhammad Ali. Then I left the business to pursue my corporate world experience and was hired often as the on-camera spokesperson for every industry imaginable. But what I saw was a trend. They would bring in people from the corner office or the corner cubicle to appear on camera alongside of me and expect them to perform at the same level of skill. That often did not go so well. So I saw a business opportunity to teach business professionals how to be better on-camera communicators. So that's really how Speaker Dynamics was born, I guess at this point over a decade ago. So what happened is I was training mostly the executive leadership team for a long time, people who are de facto spokespeople. But then COVID hit, and I went from training the executive leadership team to training the entire enterprise. So it has been a very busy couple of years at Speaker Dynamics, helping people to be able to navigate how to get business done, primarily through a webcam.
So it's really interesting. There's like 2 questions that pop up in my mind. One is that you also, besides your name of the CEO, you have the title Chief Confidence Creator at the CCC. How did that come about?
Well, actually, it was one of my clients who mentioned that title to me. They said, you should be the Chief Confidence Creator, which I thought was just a lovely sentiment. But it kind of goes back to the reason why I even started doing what I do in the first place, because I was working as an on-camera spokesperson for a big company, and I was working alongside one of their C-level executives. And she came up to me after our experience, and she said, I'm doing these videos, and I just really hate how I'm coming across. Can you help me? And this is a person who has 2 PhDs, brilliant woman. And she was made to feel less than because she wasn't good at communicating on camera. And I thought, that is wrong. Like, I can help you to be a better on-camera communicator. You can't help me get 2 PhDs. So allow me to unleash your brilliance from your head and allow it to be shared with the world. So that's kind of, my whole drive. I want to give people the confidence to be able to communicate through this medium, which is not difficult to navigate, but it just needs a little bit of know-how.
Which is so important. I mean, in higher ed, we're looking at broadband access and all kinds of things. And one of the things we found is it's just not about just the technology. It's really about the access, which requires some kind of education. And in this case, you've actually created that kind of learning, or that learning system. You have a methodology to help leaders and executive present better, called the MVPs of on-camera success. Could you explain what an MVP is and the 3 parts?
Yeah, it's not most valuable player. So it actually stands for mental mindset, vocal variety, and physical factors. And I say all three of these need to be working in concert in order to be a really effective on-camera communicator. So mental mindset is making sure that you are in the proper headspace as you're engaging with the camera. So one of the things that people often miss is they don't recognize that the camera is really the conduit to your conversation partner. That is not your audience. The camera is not, your audience. It's not like you're just performing to a lens. You are actually trying to reach the people on the other side. And the only way you can reach them is through that camera lens. So yes, I'm looking at the camera, but I'm also pouring my energy through that camera because I know that that's how I can best connect. So that's the main one of the mental mindset. Vocal variety is just understanding that whenever you're speaking on camera, you are limited in your nonverbals that you can send by the size of your screen. So your verbal delivery takes on greater importance. So you need to create some variety to how you are delivering. And that can be done by changing your pitch. It can be done by changing your pacing. It can also be done by using pauses. And pauses, especially in a virtual environment, are so, so critical because sometimes we focus on our own agenda, getting from point A to point B, and we don't realize that we're making people drink from a fire hose. They need time to, digest what you're saying, and that can be done really effectively with some well-placed pauses. And physical factors, there are really two key components that I talk about. The first is making sure that your body language is natural and not contrived, because sometimes people will think, okay, I need to do this, and so that it looks right on camera. It's not the case. You actually want your gestures to be a reflection of what you're saying. So if you're focusing on your message, your body will follow. It's not like you tell people, okay, for dinner last night, I had chicken. Now I'm going to move my right hand. And then for dessert, I had a chocolate torte. Now I'm going to move my left hand. That doesn't happen. Your body just does its own thing, provided that you give it the freedom to do so. You can't be stiff. And then eye contact is the other physical factor that people have a really big challenge with, because it's hard to get in your head that in order to make good eye contact, it's not a matter of looking at the screen. It's a matter of looking at the camera lens.
I think it's hard for all of us, but all of those factors have mattered. And I actually have put some of those in practice. I mean, before I do a webinar, I typically take a walk for 20 minutes just to get into the right headspace so that I have some kind of flow and energy and breath. And I don't look at the news. And
that's a good idea.
Well, no. And you think it doesn't matter, but I was doing a webinar the day the Ukraine war started, and I was getting all these texts from my own two kids, and they said, Mom, are you watching this? I said, after 11, I'll watch. I mean, no, just because I knew that day I had to be very present and very positive and very enthusiastic. So I found your MVPs really super, super valuable, including trying to understand how much motion and activity and hand gesturing should you do while you're speaking. And we'll get into that more. You have co-written your two books, which are pictured behind you, Suddenly Virtual and Suddenly Hybrid, with Dr. Joseph Allen, a thought leader in meeting science. And he works at the University of Utah. He's a researcher and a scientist. And it's a great pairing of your two backgrounds. Talk to us about how that collaboration came about and how these two books came about.
So this is kind of a crazy story. So both of us, Joe and I, were working as subject matter experts for a mutual client. And they asked us to be part of a webinar on the future of meetings. And we postulated that in 5 to 10 years, there would be many more virtual meetings with video at their core. So that webinar happened the first week of March, 2020. So what happened 3 weeks later, all the things that we said would happen in 5 to 10 years happened like overnight. So we ended up both going off and drinking from our own proverbial fire hoses, trying to deal with all the clients who are like, help, we need your help, because he's the meeting scientist. I was the video communication expert. And then a couple of months later, we came back together and said, so what's going on in your business? Yeah, what's going on in your business? And we realized that we were working on the same problem, but just coming at it from different angles. And so we said, okay, how can we amplify our message here? There's so much need for some guidance on this. So I had written my book OnCamera Coach with my publisher Wiley in 2017. And I reached back out to my editor and I said, hey, we have this idea. What do you think? He's like, I love it. Can you write it in 6 weeks? And we said, are you 6 weeks? So There's a good reason why I said yes, and it's because I was a broadcast journalist and deadlines do not scare me, but it should have. But we wrote it very quickly because it needed to get to the market. We needed to help people to figure this out. So that's how the first book came to pass. The second book happened because we then got a lot of questions about hybrid meetings, as the transition started to, take shape. And we were in a meeting with the editor, Joe and I said to Joe, is there more that we have to say about hybrid meetings beyond what we have in Suddenly Virtual? And Joe said, yeah, we can write a book about all the things that we could say about hybrid meetings. And my editor said, don't tease me. What do you mean? And so that's how Suddenly Hybrid happened.
Well, they're both really valuable books. And I think we're going to focus a lot today on the hybrid meeting, because I think that's the stage we're in right now, where it's not all one anything and how that works. Essentially, I found the two books to be guidebooks. They're like, the guide on the side for you. So talk to us what you think is the nature of a hybrid meeting according to the data. Like what is a hybrid meeting? What are the elements of it? And what makes for a good hybrid meeting?
So hybrid meetings by definition are meetings where you have some people who are joining in person in the physical meeting room, some people who are joining in other ways. So you could have, people coming in on their individual video boxes, or even some people who are calling in on the phone. And you have multiple communication mediums that all need to be used to communicate with each other. Now, that by its very nature makes it very complex. So for example, when you're meeting face-to-face, you're all using one communication medium. That's the air that you're mutually sharing. On a virtual meeting, you are all in one communication medium. You're all using the same screen, showing up in your boxes, but you're combining all of these whenever you're in this hybrid meeting. And that complex communication environment requires an intentional approach. But initially, what we thought when we started gathering some data about how hybrid meetings were going is that they would be terrible. People would hate them. But we were really surprised to see that people actually really got a lot of satisfaction out of them. In fact, hybrid meetings,
they do?
Which is crazy. I mean, yeah. So people found them
as a facilitator, I always think,
Well, here's the one thing to keep in mind. What we found out is those who are getting a lot out of their hybrid meetings were doing all the best practices. They had all of the policies in place to make hybrid meetings work. They had all the technology in place to make hybrid meetings work. But what they found is that people were more participatory in hybrid meetings. People were doing less bad meeting behavior, and that's stuff like monologuing or surface acting, where they look like they're fine, but inside they're maybe screaming, but they don't want to show that. And then there also was less recovery time needed between meetings. So recovery time is a chance for your brain to kind of debrief on what just happened and then prepare for the next meeting. So there's a lot of promise in the early data, but you have to make sure that you have come up with the right policies and you have all of that in place along with the technology to support it. Because if you just go into a hybrid meeting or a hybrid classroom just with a laptop open and a Zoom window open, that's not going to create what we would call meeting equity. And that's going to create, a two-tiered system where, those in the classroom or in the conference room have a better experience than those who are joining remotely.
I'm totally with you on that, which is leading me to the next question. You mentioned that any virtual or hybrid meeting has three components. It's the hardware, the software, and the skillsware. Share with us what each of those entails, and especially some of the challenges with skillsware. You go into that quite a bit in the books.
Right. So hardware is just what do you have in, for example, the conference room to support a hybrid meeting? I actually taught two classes last week, and they were both hybrid. The first one I was actually teaching from a virtual position. So I was joining virtually. The class primarily was in person in the hybrid classroom, but they had plenty of people who were joining from all over the world virtually. And they had an amazing hardware setup. So in the physical classroom, they had 3 monitors. They had one monitor with my head big. They had another monitor with my slides big. And then they had another monitor that had all the people who were joining virtually represented in their boxes and with the chat window open. So everybody was able to see everything else. There was also an in-classroom moderator, the professor, who was actually able to kind of call on people to ask questions in the classroom itself. So she was able to kind of navigate that for me. And then I could call on people who were on the screen because I was actually on the screen as well. So that hybrid setup was amazing. So having the monitors, having good audio, having, adequate ways of, visually representing your students is really critical.
And you had the tech support. It had all been tested.
Tech support is huge.
All working before you even got into the meeting, which is
right. So that was an excellent, hybrid classroom setup. The other one I taught had what I had previously mentioned, where basically they opened up their laptop and had a Zoom window open, and that was supposed to be an adequate, virtual experience. It did not work for those who are joining remotely. But so that's the hardware. The software is just what sort of platform are you using? Is it something that is, intuitive? Is it accessible by all? And is it something that is going to work for those who are in the classroom as well as for those who are joining virtually, joining remotely? One of the things we talk about is continuing to use chat, even if you have people who are in the physical space, because that's a way to create some participation equity, because oftentimes it can be difficult to get a word in edgewise if you're a remote attendee, because the people in the actual physical classroom, will dominate the conversation just because it's easier to take up that airspace. And then the skillware is like training your people to, for one thing, if you're a meeting leader, know how to facilitate that, but also to make sure that those who are in attendance know what their jobs are and how they can help to create an environment that is equitable for everybody.
Yeah, these are all really important things. There's one thing you brought up, and it's difficult for me in hybrid meetings, which is what we call proximity bias. Yes. We always want to talk, it's the 3 degrees of separation. I mean, I'd rather talk to someone close to me than 180 degrees away from me. Right. How do we deal with that? Because it's kind of so built into our reptilian brain, right?
Absolutely. Well, I think one of the things that helps is being aware of it. And even if you break it down into, our fully virtual world that we were living in at one point, I know that I had a tendency to call on people who had their video on versus those who did not, because it was less scary. Like I could see that they were there. I could see that they were engaged.
I'm so there with that.
Yeah. And then like, if you call on somebody who is just represented by the black box with the name, are they really there? Are you going to call them and then they don't answer? And that's embarrassing for them, but certainly, embarrassing for you as well. So the proximity bias that we experience in hybrid is you're more apt, if you are leading a meeting from within the conference room, to turn to your right and say, hey, Joe, what do you think? Than actually consulting those who are joining remotely. So one of the policies that you can put in place is that remote speak first. So say you're going down your agenda, you get to your first topic of discussion, rather than turning to Joe, you turn your attention to the monitor, which represents those remote attendees, and you say, hey, Laurie, what do you think about this? Can you weigh in? And if you have remote speak first, A, it gives them an opportunity to weigh in, but B, it also raises the collective awareness of everyone of who is actually in the meeting. It's not necessarily those who are just gathered around the conference table.
Yeah, I think it's so important. I led a meeting the other day for some universities system-wide for a state, and there were 120 attendees, and we went into a breakout session, and then they were going to report back. Now, there's no way that 50 breakout rooms were going to be able to all speak in the reflection time, but I did put this in practice, Karin. I called on people who were black boxing me. I called on names that I couldn't pronounce. I called on different ones. And, the feedback was it was one of the most effective and engaging, like the highlight of my day. So I think sometimes what we don't realize is we're afraid to do these things because of going back to your confidence thing. We think we have more control if we can do it with what we know rather than taking these little, what I call smart risks you're mentioning, because it takes a kind of a leap of faith there to try these things out.
It does. And if you set the expectation at the top of the meeting, hey, I might cold call you. And the reason why I'm doing that is because it's harder for me to read the entire room when, for example, half is virtual and half is in person. So if I'm calling on you, it's not me putting you on the spot. It's just me having an awareness that I may miss out on an opportunity to bring you into the conversation. And I want to give you that chance, and then set some psychological safety by saying, if you don't have anything to add, it's perfectly okay to say, I don't have anything to add, so people don't feel like they have to have something of value to put forth.
So one of the things that I think is really difficult is that we don't always, because we can't observe the whole body. We don't even know if they're 5 foot tall or 6 foot tall, or, we don't have, are they wearing shorts? Are they wearing pants? We don't know. And there's so much that we learn in higher ed through observation. How do we deal with that barrier of not actually being able to physically see some of the things that would give us insights into our attendees in a meeting?
Yeah, and it is difficult, right? Because you do take in so much just by, sharing the air with people, but what I look for is if people are, for one thing, you have to have cameras on. If you can make it a mandate in your classroom, in your meetings, to have cameras on, you should. And I'm not talking about like the 150 person meeting where everybody has their camera on, because there's diminishing value in that. It can often be distracting if you have all those people up there on their boxes.
Yeah, the Brady Bunch effect, right?
Right. And they all have the same virtual background, which is like some industrial like studio thing. You're like, you're not all sitting in the same spot. It gets a little like confusing to the eye. But what I would say is, if you're in a meeting that is designed to be collaborative and discussion based, which typically your sweet spot is like 5 to 7 people, you want to have all of cameras on so that you are able to take a quick view of the room and look for those nonverbals. They're a little more subtle than if you were actually in the class with them or in the meeting with them. But things that I look for example, is if somebody is leaning towards the camera, that is usually a precursor to them wanting to say something. And so I will proactively call on them. I'll do the same thing. If I see somebody unmute themselves before they even utter a word, I'm calling on them, and I call on them by name, because if you don't, people never quite know when they have the floor. And that's what leads to that kind of stunted and stilted conversation. So if you are leading a virtual meeting or a hybrid meeting, you can't just kind of let it be a free for all, because you won't get the kind of, smooth conversation flow that you're looking for. You have to be really proactive and kind of guide them through the conversation so that you can, pull out participation in a meaningful way and in an equitable way. And also don't, have people who are extroverted be able to, suck up all the airtime.
So it's reminding me of a story that happened during the pandemic. I was teaching a course on going from school to work at Otis Art Institute. And many of my students were facing challenges with broadband access and the technology. And I was also facing the challenge of the black box with a name on it. Yeah. And so I said, why don't you all create avatars for your, if you're not willing to put up a photo because you don't want to show me where I understood the not wanting to reveal where I live, or I don't have a good enough photo or whatever. Yeah. So they all created avatars because they're in this entertainment industry program. Right. And if I ever meet them, I will now only think of them in terms of their avatar. But it actually helped me, even that, because that little drawing that they made of themselves as a cartoon character made it easier for me to start identifying who they were in that course of the 15 weeks that I was working with them. Yeah. So one of the things I think what's nice is that you're fairly creative in your approach to things. Meetings are hard. Even face-to-face meetings can be hard. And then we add on virtual and hybrid. And the leader is always responsible for the content and should be responsible for the facilitation, organization, and accountability for outcomes. It's a lot. How can a leader manage all these roles? I mean, I think the old school was I just show up with my PowerPoint. The new school, that wouldn't be enough. So what's the best way as a leader to plan and get ready for meetings?
I would say spread the responsibility around. So creating new meeting roles can really help you, because you're right, there's a huge cognitive burden that you have to now carry around as a meeting leader if there's a technology component to it. So one of the things that we suggest is having a technology lead in any of your meetings who can troubleshoot any sort of issues that might occur as a result of the platform that you're using. And that way you're not the one trying to do that and keeping you from actually, moving the conversation forward. I also suggest using a moderator or a facilitator of the meeting beyond you. Somebody who does not necessarily have decision-making power, but is familiar enough with the topic being discussed that they can, kind of pull out that even participation and kind of keep you on track. Somebody who can check out the timestamps on your agenda and say, hey, you had planned to talk about this for 10 minutes. We're about 12 minutes in. Do you want to keep talking about this? Just somebody to kind of hold you accountable to that agenda so that you stay on time. So that can be really helpful. The other thing that I would recommend if you're doing a hybrid meeting, for example, is creating an in-room ally system. So sometimes this can be formalized where okay, these 5 people are showing up in the conference room. These 5 people are joining remotely. Let's connect each of them, create pairs. So that, for example, Lori, you're going to be the in-room person ally for Karin. So if you get to a topic of discussion where you're like, hey, Karin would have a really unique perspective on this, you could speak up in the meeting room and say, hey, can we bring Karin into this conversation? Because I know that she would have a lot to say. Having those in-room allies, those in-room buddies can make a big difference in terms of making that meeting more engaging and collaborative than if you just kind of leave it to chance.
Yeah, really great. And you have some simple rules, like even the way you're set up today. To talk a little bit about how you prep your setup. What's a good setup? You're wearing a lavalier. I'm wearing my headset broke, so I'm wearing my.
But you know what, that works, Lori, though. And I think that is an important thing. So you're talking about like production value stuff. So this is such a critical component, but one that people, I think, were reluctant to address because they felt like it was a matter of, being vain to want to show up, the way you want to, at your best. But it's not vanity. It's a matter of showing respect for the people on the other side, because your job as a messenger is to make sure that people can receive your message as easily as possible. And that means you want to ensure that they can read your facial expressions, that they can see your body language, that, you have good audio so they can hear you clearly. So all of these things go into that production value that makes you a more effective leader. And also you're protecting your personal and corporate brand. So you mentioned the audio. I use a lavalier microphone because my laptop microphones are not good. It makes it sound like I'm in a tin can. A lot of that has to do with the acoustics of your room. So for example, if you have hardwood floors, tile floors, high ceilings, windows without window treatments, that can create a really bouncy sound environment. So I knew I needed an external microphone that was going to be more narrow in its range and would pick up my voice better. I would suggest if you have different audio options, like you talked about your headset, you've got your little earbuds there, you can toggle back and forth between the audio inputs on your platform. Hop on a call with a friend or a colleague who will be candid with you and will tell you what sounds good and what does not. In terms of your background, the key is making sure that it's not distracting. And, you want it to be uncluttered. You don't want to have a mess behind you. That's pretty basic. But you also don't want to have anything that can pull focus. You want the focus to be on you and what you're saying and not on, for example, your bobblehead doll collection behind you. And then, virtual
unless you work in an animation company and then
right, exactly. Right. And even so you can have one conversation starter, but you don't want to have 10. So just be aware of that, if you have more than that, it can read as clutter. But I'm not completely opposed to the virtual backgrounds either, but the challenge that you have to address is whether they layer evenly. So the artificial intelligence that is used to create them is good, but it's not perfect. And sometimes it can't tell where you end and your background begins. So for example, if I use one, I often end up having my hair eaten by a virtual background.
Because when I went white during COVID,
yes,
everybody said, are you going to use the virtual backgrounds? I said, not if you just only want to see a face. I just disappear. I just completely disappear. No.
So, but hopefully you figured that out before you did something like that was high stakes, right?
No, I tried it and I said, I'm going back to my bookshelf. My standard, it looks like I'm an academic in the office. I'm going back
Right.
to what people expect. So,
Yeah, and your background's great. So, but I think it's important to note that they're not all created equal. And I tend to prefer a blurred background over a real over a virtual back, like the ones with the images, just because I think that they do layer better, and it makes you, the speaker, be the focus of attention. But early research indicates that people prefer a real background, if possible, one that's neutral and professional.
oh, so that's so validating for me because I actually prefer, but I thought I'm going to more and more things where there's these virtual backgrounds. And I guess it has to do with the company branding or the school branding, like
It does. And it's privacy as well. I mean, there are some people who, as you mentioned, your students, they didn't necessarily want to show you where they were living, and that's understandable. So in that situation, I would say put up the blurred background. People won't know what's behind you, and it'll allow you to still show up professionally. But if you do that, just make sure that you focus on having good lighting. You want your face to be the brightest thing in the frame. So make sure that people can, see your facial expressions and that you can make good eye contact because you don't have shadows. A lot of people will use just overhead lights, and that creates a downward cast that puts your eyes in shadow. And eye contact is the best way to build trust and believability.
So that makes me want to, so I'm going to divulge something, be very candid. I am not one of the people that has a ring light. I know almost everybody I know has a ring light, but I don't. My desk sits right in front of a window. So believe it or not, you guys out there, I have a piece of paper with tape on it that I move across the window so that it won't get me that, because in fall and spring, I get a very harsh lighting that comes raking across my face. But I found this piece of paper diffuses that light and I get this. So
Yeah.
I'm just letting you know, you don't have to go out and spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars. I mean, your lavalier, what, $29 at Target? I mean,
if that, yeah. And actually, I love that you mentioned, your paper diffuser, because, that actually is a great, simple solution, that it does not require any sort of investment. And I always tell people, if you have any lamps in your space, like just bring and put it on either side of your webcam so that your face is evenly lit and you're in good shape. Actually, natural light is the most flattering light around there. So if you can face a window, you are in good shape.
No, I just was realizing that some of the younger people I was presenting with were telling me I bought this and I bought that and I got this new microphone and I got like 3 monitors, and I go, I'm basic Pasadena. So just
but that's all
you know.
you need. And it's so funny. I've had so many clients who have been like, yeah, I stole this ring light from my daughter. She does TikTok videos. I'm like, oh, great. You could keep it or you could give it back to her and just get that lamp, from your side table there. And that works too.
But I think that goes back to what you've been saying and kind of preaching all along here today, is being more authentic and allowing yourself to be as natural as you can, rather than being hyper aware and losing your confidence and letting the technology sort of distract you.
Yeah.
So I want to get back to something I think super important that I learned in the book: creating ground rules that encourage engaging and intentional meetings. So you have a list of things, starting off with curated attendee list. Like, go through that list for us.
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, some of those things are just best practices for any sort of meeting. And you could say they're common sense, but Joe would say they're not commonly practiced. And that's totally true. So, one of the things.
I think this is important because I think,
Yeah.
at LinkedIn, we obviously do hybrid all the time, but the ground rules are not always clear. And I'll explain more about how this is proved for me. But
Okay.
when I'm working with higher education clients, as you know, today I started off, the ground rules for today are, this is what it's going to happen. This is the agenda. This is what's going to do. But I'm the master of the universe on a webinar. It's not always that way in a meeting where you said we need to engage everybody in the meeting. So continue on with them, because there's like pre-work. Do we send out stuff before the meeting?
Especially in a hybrid setting, I would say lean into pre-work more than ever, because for one thing, our world has been meetingizationized. We have more meetings now than we ever have, and oftentimes they're longer than they've ever been. So, how do you cut down on that meeting fatigue? Well, having less of them and making the time spent in the meeting more meaningful. One of the ways to do that is to send out pre-work, have people, go through the process of kind of, learning the basics, so you can walk into that meeting and you're at a higher level of understanding. So you can skip the information sharing portion and you can go straight to the discussion. There are so many different ways of doing pre-work now in an asynchronous fashion. A lot of them are using the technology that we've gotten so comfortable with. If you have a report that you need to do, that you want to share, record yourself on a meeting platform, sharing your screen, and talk them through the whole thing, and then send that video file out that can be consumed on their own time. Don't eat up your meeting time doing that initial information share. Allow people to look at it, be thinking about it, come with their questions. And when you go into the meeting, that's where you can start. So that is a way to kind of shorten the duration of your meeting. You mentioned the curated invite list. The reason why we really point to this is anybody who is there just to be a spectator should not be in the room, because you want to stick to that sweet spot of 5 to 7 people in a meeting that is supposed to be collaborative and discussion based and lead to a decision. Anything beyond that gets really unwieldy, especially in a hybrid situation. So make sure that the people who are there for a reason. They have valuable input that is required in order to meet the goal and the purpose of the meeting itself. And if you need to have people be in the know, you can record the meeting and you can send it to them and they can watch it afterwards. So that is a really great tip to be able to do. The other thing I mentioned is creating a turn-taking policy, especially in a hybrid meeting. We've kind of touched on the challenges that are inherent when people who are in the physical conference room are able to dominate the conversation much easier than those who are remote. If you have a turn-taking policy in place and have people adhere to it, that allows for more even participation. And that means not just verbal participation, but nonverbal participation. So I mentioned using chat and kind of taking that into the hybrid meeting, hybrid classroom as well. That is something that you want to encourage, especially remote attendees, to use. If they have something that they want to add, allow them to put it into chat. And then you, as the meeting leader or the meeting moderator or facilitator, takes note of that and then brings that into the conversation, into the verbal dialogue, because that allows remote attendees who might not be able to get in a word edgewise to be able to insert themselves into the conversation.
So I think there's one thing you could help me out with. For me, there's informal and formal meetings and internal and external meetings. The external and formal meetings really need a pretty good set agenda. But in an informal or an internal meeting in an organization, do you allow time for the check-in just to see where everybody is at with their emotional well-being? What are your thoughts on this?
With an internal meeting, for sure, you should be doing that. And that's one of the things that we've kind of lost whenever we moved to fully virtual, and still kind of has lingering effects because of the hybrid. We've lost that social lubrication that used to happen organically. So for example, you're going into a team meeting, you're all making your way from your cubicles down to the conference room, and you chit chat. You have those conversations. Hey, how's Jimmy doing? Yeah, how did that meeting go? You don't have the opportunity to do that if you have some people who are remote or if you're fully remote. So you need to take the time to do that at the start of the meeting. Have that moment of humanity. So you can, continue to foster the relationships, build the ties, and establish rapport. And I would say you can even do that in an external meeting as well. Perhaps you're asking different questions, but that little chit chat, that small talk that is non-business related, actually leads to better business outcomes. So it's not just a nice to have, it's actually a need to have, and something that you should invest some time in doing.
Yeah, I think it makes you be more empathetic. And I think that works really well. That chat. And then your other idea I like is not, even if you're running the meeting, don't be the star of the meeting. You make sure that make sure other people on the team have the opportunity to put in what their best thing of the week, or their this or that. Make sure that there's kind of a round robin effect there.
The biggest
there are
determinant.
Some other
Yeah.
Yeah.
The biggest determinant of people feeling good about a meeting is how much they participated. If they participated a lot, they're going to love it. So lean into that for sure. Spread it out.
And meetings are all different time lengths. You know, we find at LinkedIn and internally in our organization, most of ours are around 30 minutes, which is very effective. When we have a larger meeting, that's a monthly meeting, that's going to be a lot of reporting, it's usually around 50 minutes. In higher ed, we have been really bad about all of this. I mean, if a class was 3 hours, God damn it, it's going to, oops, I shouldn't have said that. It's going to be 3 hours on Zoom. And we find that I would have students say to me, I have been on Zoom for 6 hours straight because of the scheduling, because they're scheduling it like they would have done for a face-to-face time. And so I'm on 3 to 6, and then I'm from 6:30 to 9:30. Help us in higher ed think about meeting length and what we can do effectively trying to teach people and educate people. You probably have some data on that.
We definitely do. And a lot of it, I'm sure you've seen, it has to do with how it feels to be in a video meeting, a video classroom versus an in-person meeting, in-person classroom. It requires more energy. It's more exhausting to be in this environment than if you're face-to-face. And that was one of the things that horrified me initially when the pandemic began, that when school districts moved to that completely online version, they didn't adjust how they were running their classes, running their school day. These little kids were on Zoom for like 6 hours. It was terrible. And they were young. So, I mean, college students, maybe they can handle it a little bit better, but still it's exhausting for all of us. So, I will share with you just what my co-author, Joe Allen, did to his classroom. So he used to do 45-minute lectures, and then he'd have discussion at the end. He shifted to doing 7-minute lecturettes and then having deep discussion after those 7 minutes. And then he'd do another 7-minute lecturette, and then he'd have more deep discussion. It's a matter of making sure that you have these moments of deep engagement inserted throughout the time. So I'm not going to sit here and say, okay, never do a 3-hour class. But what I would say is,
no, I'm telling you, they haven't changed the schedules. They still believe it's the same as a room. So
okay. if you can, but if you're in that situation, then make sure that you are coming up with ways to get people to do things throughout. So, I call it tools of engagement, and that can be, something like, okay, polling them. It can be, putting something in a chat, using a video, that is going to be changing up how they're receiving the information, putting them in breakout rooms, having that Q&A that is actually, really, engaging, where people are actually, saying a lot of stuff. You just have one person droning on, coming up with ways to break up how you're delivering your content and how they're receiving it is really crucial. The one violation I see done still on a regular basis is allowing slides to dominate the screen. So sometimes it's because people are excited just that they can get their slides up there. The technology worked and they're afraid to take them down.
Right.
But if you have your slides dominating the screen, it's diminishing your presence. It's diminishing your value, and you're giving too much priority to the slides. And, at a certain point, yeah, they are imparting information, but there is a time where they will no longer be imparting information. They're simply a resting spot for the eyes of your audience. And when it becomes a resting spot, guess what happens to their brains? They check out. They're somewhere else. So what I do whenever I'm teaching is I am moving in and out of screen share constantly. If I'm speaking to something directly on the screen, like in my slide, I'll keep it up there. But as soon as I'm not, I take it away and I let them reconnect with me, being on camera. So if you can learn how to be really comfortable moving quickly in and out of screen share, it's going to make a big difference. Are you demonstrating?
Yes, yeah, I know. I just cue the slides, because we're getting to the point now where I'd like to talk a little bit about. We're almost to the Q&A part, and I wanted to just go back one slide.
Yep.
There are so many ways to get a hold of Karin. I wanted to do this before we get into Q&A. She has
nice.
Fabulous website. She has a blog. She has 6 courses. Is it 6 courses?
I have 3 main ones, and then there are some 3 additional ones that are,
right.
Bonus material, I guess you'd say.
And she also is an active player on LinkedIn with her company page and her personal page as well. So there's lots of things. So of course, I I'm surprising her with this. She doesn't know about this. I took your assessment. And so she has these assessments online for the books, and they're really great. And I'm not going to go through all of it because I'm not going to make Karin read all of this. But it was really kind of, when I said, what's the template for a meeting? What are some of the best practices? So you're actually seeing my version of this assessment of how to, this is from the facilitator point of view. And I thought I would get a very high score, but I only got an 89.
That's still pretty good though.
It's pretty good. But I realized my confusion was on these, I'm a pretty loosey-goosey person on these internal, less formal meetings that I don't necessarily follow best practices when those happen. So my bad, I realized that. But you kindly said, try to turn your sometimes into always. So I thought I appreciated the yeses there. Yeah. And then you have one from the attendee's point. How can I be a better attendee, a more active attendee, play better with the people in the sandbox? And this one is not quite as long, but again, this was really great. I scored, I'm a genius on this one. I'm a good attendee. This only went up to like a 65 or 70. So yes. I have like one of the higher scores. But I wanted you to know that our website has lots of information and lots of fun things that you can learn about yourself. And you don't have to start from scratch. And you didn't have to take notes throughout this whole time and keep up with this, that she's got really good things and really good resources and materials on that website.
Thank you for showing that. And I will say, Lori, like those are hybrid meeting assessments for meeting leaders and meeting attendees, but you can also apply a lot of them to any sort of meeting that you're having. And the reason why you really need to kind of figure out where you are in terms of your hybrid meeting readiness is because there's less margin for error whenever you are in a hybrid meeting. Face-to-face, you can kind of, on the fly, fix some of the things you might have overlooked. But you can't when you're in a hybrid meeting because there's too many other things that you have to consider.
Well, I was so excited when I found that because I thought, well, I'll just start with this template. I could take these concepts without doing a survey. This is a survey assessment, and kind of create something that I could use it, send out to any team, anytime, and say, like, how do we all feel? Because usually when I do something like this, even when I'm teaching, I'll say, let's come up with the rules of engagement. I do it the first day of class or the first time I work with the team. And we co-author it, we co-create it. Because I think if everyone doesn't buy in and everyone doesn't have consensus around this, then we are not making what I call, one of the things we haven't maybe emphasized much, you don't get good meetings or good classrooms without it being a safe, trusted environment. You won't get people speaking up. So that's really important. So Anna, let's turn to you and find out what questions we have from the attendees today.
Sure. So we did have a question come in, and this is surrounding the recording of meetings. So this participant is curious, if you are recording a meeting, what are your thoughts in terms of gaining permission from the participants?
That is very much dependent upon the state in which you reside and are doing business, and also, what the company culture is. So I work across all verticals. Some of the clients I have are global law firms. You will never be able to record a meeting there. but there are also organizations, like a lot of my tech customers are always recording their meetings. That is like a given. And in fact, before a meeting even begins, there's a pop-up that says this meeting is being recorded. Just we're making you aware. Do you want to stay in or you want to proceed? And having that pop-up come up, kind of gives you, sign off that, okay, yeah, I'm okay being recorded. But you need to check your laws in terms of consent in the states themselves to find out if it's permissible or not.
And just to tag in, because I teach at a lot of universities in California, in higher ed, this has been well mapped out. If you're teaching a class, you record it because it's necessary for your entire classroom because of access to technology and people getting sick with COVID or what other reasons pop up. But you can't share that recording outside of that classroom.
Right.
So if you invite a guest speaker on those days, you really need to do an external meeting so that could be shared with someone from outside your campus, and you have to set that meeting up a little differently. That's just a cue there. I've done it many, many times. It's one of the cool things about virtual and hybrid meetings is you can invite people from all over the world to be part of your meetings that you couldn't before. So that's one of the cool factors. And then if you're using something like Zoom Webinar, again, it will prompt you. And in California, we're very big about accessibility. Closed captioning is available probably at almost every university here in California, because we want that recording to be accessible to all people, whether they have hearing, visual impairment, whatever issues that they have. So that's another thing. Zoom has been a really good partner on this. Microsoft Teams is a really good partner. I know that in Texas, that system uses Teams all the time. Those are the two predominant technologies that are used right now in higher ed.
Yeah.
Anna, more questions?
Yeah, so we had just some general interest in the book as well as the assessment you were sharing, Lori. So maybe perhaps, Lori, just some confirmation, we'll be able to share those resources out with the attendees, correct?
I will definitely send a PDF of this deck out, and they're all linkable. But Karin, go ahead and tell about it. They're on Amazon, right? Karin, tell us where
They're everywhere.
books.
I mean, honestly, anywhere you can buy books, you will find them. So, I mean, this is kind of like my shameless self-promotion, but, and so I'm breaking my rule of conversation starters, having one. I actually probably hopefully have two. Maybe the Emmy might be something too, but yeah. So, do what I do, or do what I say, not what I do. But you can find the books anywhere that you buy books. They've really done well, which is very gratifying. There's a lot of need out there as people are trying to just figure this out. But I guess just my overall, thought to you is we're not going back to the way it was. It's the genie is out of the bottle. This sort of communication will be a part of how we get business done, how we, do education from here on out. And it's not a bad thing. It actually, Laura, you mentioned one of the great things that it does break down geographic barriers, and it helps you to have a wider footprint than if you're just limited to location. So it just requires us to flex our skills in a different way and grow, and that can be painful. But there's so much promise with hybrid formats, and we've already experienced it with virtual. But I think that we're primarily going to land in this hybrid scenario. That's the way the world of work has gone, and I would imagine that education would follow.
Also, she's being very humble. It's speakersdynamics.com, but could you tell us a little bit further, explain how you're working with schools like Stanford and Duke, and I know you've been working with some schools in North Carolina. What kind of work are you doing in higher ed? What kind of webinars?
Yeah, well, Duke and Stanford, those were kind of ahead of their game. I've been teaching, on-camera communication skills for years at both of those institutions as part of their graduate studies, because there was a recognition that there was a need for people to be, good on camera, to have good on-camera presence. Initially it was to prepare people for digital interviews, because a lot of interviews were being, conducted this way, right? And so
I'm so glad you mentioned that. This is the season, you guys out in higher ed. You should be helping your students go from school to work. They should.
Yeah. Well, and also with that in mind, one of the things that I had to kind of correct was helping people to understand how their on-camera presence should be in a professional setting versus on FaceTime talking about where they're going to go that night for dinner. You have to make sure that they're showing up in a way that is a good reflection of their level of professionalism that they would display. So I think it's really critical to kind of lean into that. But so that's how I began actually with Duke and with Stanford, is teaching those skills from a digital interviewing standpoint. But then, video has been spreading its tentacles, across the corporate landscape for quite some time. And so, those two institutions in particular really wanted to help their students be able to thrive in that environment. Who knew that on-camera presence was going to become a business metric, but it is. And, especially then.
It's really important. And I was going to say that a lot of the students that I've been coaching through LinkedIn and helping out with our clients, their first round is they're given 3 questions to answer as videos. They're not meeting with the real person. So this video presence is really important. And I was working with a major East Coast public state university who have a great engineering program. And in coaching those engineers, they tended to do, going back to your MVPs, they kind of talked monotone about their projects and they kind of looked down. And I said, you're going to have to be a little bit more amped up and, be a little more enthusiastic. If you, put a stuffed animal in front of you, or put your girlfriend across the room, like be more present. I just to share a story, the first time I did a course for LinkedIn, at that time it was lynda.com, and they put me into a sound booth. I almost burst into tears, and I said to the producer, there's no one to talk to. I'm a much better teacher when I have an audience. So the producer said to me, he said, I'll open up this window and sit on the other side. I'll be doing other work, but pretend I'm your student. And you know what? Just having that physical presence of that person across the way made it, my take started, instead of taking 3 takes, I was doing them in 1 take. So you can cheat, guys. You can make it more interesting for yourselves. Anna, I think we have time for about 1 or 2 more questions, if there's any more.
Sure, we did have another question submitted. This person is curious how you think culture is affected. They note that some leadership find hybrid and remote policies can affect in-office culture.
For sure. And I think that one of the things that we're struggling with is a gap between what leaders want and what their workforce wants. Leaders, if they were given their choice, would probably have everybody back in the office, right? And that's a very broad statement, but surveys do indicate that more top executives would prefer to have an in-office experience. But the majority of employees really like hybrid. And so that creates this disconnect that needs to be kind of figured out. And that's still being figured out as we go. What I can do is share with you a success story from a hybrid company that I profiled in Suddenly Hybrid, where they've been doing hybrid for a long time, actually since the inception of it, because their founders appreciated having the opportunity to travel. So they wanted to give people a chance to be able to spend certain, months of the year, working from anywhere. So they've done hybrid right from the get-go, and they're one of the top performing companies in Australia. But what they do is they give people the flexibility to work hybrid, but they do have what they call back to base meetings quarterly, which is like basically an offsite onsite. Everybody comes back to the corporate headquarters for a week. And as this one employee was telling me, that he's like, it's not the most productive week, but it's probably one of the most important weeks, because you're able to, just socialize. And the person who you've been on a happy hour with on Zoom for weeks, you can actually go out and have a drink with them in person. And you create that team cohesion that can be difficult to create fully virtually. So what I would suggest is, if you are trying to figure this out, trying to, cultivate that culture when people aren't in the office, all the time, make opportunities for them to have that in-person connection, team cohesion time, but also allow them to work in a way that they want to work. So it's that whole combination of, working remotely, but then also taking time to get together and build that culture face to face.
I think that's so true, Karin. We have a saying inside LinkedIn Learning that we're moving from the great reshuffle back to the great reconnection, and we need to learn how to reconnect. Like we're out of practice. So I think this is really important. It looks like we've covered most of the questions, Karin. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up today?
I just appreciate the opportunity, and I would just encourage you all to, lean into this new way of communicating. There's a lot of opportunity. There's also a lot of resources. I know that you're putting them up there on the screen, Lori. We have a lot on speakerdynamics.com. It's where you'll find all the books, the different ways that I do training, and also, a little bit more about, the hybrid meeting readiness, and how you can make sure that you are going to, have all the tools that you need, from a technology and just a people standpoint, to be able to get the most out of these meetings.
Well, Karin, you're so great, and you're so generous, and you're so smart and wonderful. I just really enjoyed doing this with you today. And I mean, people are already out buying your book. So I feel no, it was in the chat. I'm buying, I just ordered the book. So I think that is the highest compliment you can get during a webinar. This webinar will be recorded, and we will send out a recording as well as this deck with the links to you in the next 24 hours. I want to remind you, this is a monthly series, and that if you want to see all of the series or any of the things that we've done prior to this, you can go to highereducation/that.com. And I wanted to talk about that next week, if I can get it to work. Maybe I can't. And I'll just go back to stopping share and saying it out loud. Next month, we're going to be doing a series with Jen Jortner Cassidy on well-being. We think the well-being revolution is here, and that cultures and especially higher ed need to talk about it. Whenever I go to things for chancellors, for presidents of universities, on their top 3 lists are the well-being of the faculty and the staff. It is not number 10 anymore. It's number 3. It's up there way high. So I think this is an important thing to address, and how, again, we can create a culture in terms of the organization. But what can we do individually? Some things we can do every day ourselves to help with this. It's really about being empathetic and putting some best practices into place. So thank you all for joining us today, and we hope we see you next time at the Higher Education Leaders event. That next event on well-being will be on March 19th. You can always go to our page on the LinkedIn page. Thank you, Karin. Thank you, attendees. It's been great to be here with all of you today. Thank you so much.